Morning, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett, in for our friend and neighbor Vladimir Duthiers. We are watching all the news happening around the world at this very moment. Tariffs from Canada, Mexico, and China. They're all, in effect, sparking an all-out trade war with some of the United States' biggest economic partners. We'll look at the impact to your wallet. And President Trump appears to lay out his vision for America to a joint session of Congress, with a speech coming hours after the tariffs were implemented and after all funding for Ukraine was frozen. What does this all mean? Plus, severe storms are battering the South, causing dangerous conditions and upending Mardi Gras celebrations. We'll have your complete forecast. This is CBS News 24/7. So let's start with a deep dive on these fresh new tariffs levied by the Trump administration. Canada, Mexico, China, all impacted by this, and it's sparking fears of a trade war that ultimately will have an impact on the price of what you pay for goods. Global markets are on edge as imports from Canada and Mexico are now to be taxed at 25%. Tariffs on Chinese imports have doubled to 20%. And in response, China and Canada have retaliated with their own tariffs on U.S. goods, and Mexico is vowing to do the same come Sunday. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, we just heard from the Mexican president this morning saying that she is cooperating with the U.S. on things like narcotics and counterterrorism. She's vowing to respond economically Sunday. How is the president justifying these tariffs? Some are describing them as a punishment.
And the Mexican president saying she hopes to speak with President Trump on Thursday. We are waiting formal confirmation from the White House that there may be such a conversation. Look, we are, in essence, in the middle of a trade war now between these four countries, essentially started by the United States, and now we're anticipating retaliation that is essentially going to lead to higher prices overall on goods coming from Canada and goods coming from China, and if Mexico makes good on it, goods coming from Mexico as well, unless the United States suddenly backs off. Remember, these kinds of disputes can be temporary, they can last a while, and they can be retaliated against again. So we start it, Canada retaliates, we could retaliate, and it could keep going like that for a while. We'll have to wait and see. But the president insisting that this is something that has to happen. He casts it, his administration likes to cast it in part as a war on drugs because of the concern about the illegal shipment of fentanyl into the United States, certainly most of it coming from Mexico, in some cases by way of parts of fentanyl produced in Canada, or in China, forgive me, China. Canada then has just a minuscule amount, comparably, that comes in from the north into the United States. The president trying, again, casting this as if you don't work on helping us fight the drug problem, we're going to continue to retaliate with these tariffs. And we've seen some progress, certainly, on the Mexican side of the border, the Canadians insisting that they have amped up their border security and anti-drug operations as well in the last month or so. But regardless, it's now underway, and we're going to watch today, Errol, among other things, to see how the markets react to this, because that is a gauge that the president is quite sensitive to, in part because he likes to track it, and because a lot of the people around him or close to him that phone into him are also, of course, invested heavily in the stock market.
Yeah, we're looking at the Dow Jones pulling back 600 points this morning already. Ed, there's another way in which President Trump is pulling economic levers to get what he wants from other nations. The Trump administration now freezing aid to Ukraine. Walk us through this decision and how it's working.
Well, so let's remember that there's about $3.85 billion left in what's called presidential drawdown authority, or money a president can tap to spend on Ukraine's defense. That's left over from the Biden years. All but $385 billion of the authority has been spent. No new money has been spent by the Trump administration since he took office on January 20th. So in essence, what he's now declaring has already sort of been policy for the last month plus anyway, and that he's not authorizing anything new. A lot of the money that was authorized by President Biden is still, in essence, being spent, and things are still being delivered. And there's been some indication from the Ukrainians that they've got about 6 months' worth of supply before they really start running into shortages. And so conceivably, again, another potentially temporary problem, if you were to see a resumption of talks between the United States and Ukraine, which of course the president says only happens if Zelensky somehow signals remorse or apology for what happened last Friday here at the White House, then conceivably he could turn the spigot back on. And then, of course, you have the Europeans working towards coming up with a new defense pact that would also assist Ukraine. But, of course, they want to do that in concert with the United States. So a lot there to be sorted out as well.
And it's worth acknowledging that for a lot of Republican voters and Republican representatives, they were weary of endless aid to Ukraine so that they could make priorities for Americans and voters. And when it comes to the president's address tonight, Ed, as you've emphasized so many times, all politics is local. If people are experiencing increasing costs for things like eggs, inflation continues to rear its ugly head, how will the president overall justify his moves?
Well, the White House says he's expected to focus much of the speech tonight on the economy, on fighting inflation, and on his decision to impose these tariffs. That would be wise because our recent CBS News polling suggests most American voters still chiefly concerned about inflation and the economy. And while he has spent much of the last several days focused on things like tariffs, like the war in Ukraine, or like downsizing the federal government, those issues rank lower in concern or interest than the economy and inflation. So the White House claiming, at this hour at least, that that'll be a big focus of the speech tonight. Let's remember, though, whether it was his campaign, whether it was his previous White House, whether it's his current White House, they may say one thing during the day ahead of a big moment. He'll do whatever it is he wants to do later tonight when he speaks. But for now, at least, they're signaling much of the address will focus on the economy and an explanation of the changes, the real huge changes he's made in foreign policy over the last 45 days or so, Errol.
Yeah, that's why it's always good to watch the speech live, because those unscripted moments can say much more than some of the talking points ahead of time. Ed O'Keefe from the White House for us. Great to see you this morning, Ed. Thank you for that. And do stay with CBS News 24/7 all day for continuing coverage of the president's address to Congress. Join us at 5 p.m. Eastern for a special edition of America Decides. The speech is at 9 p.m., followed by the Democratic response. And then, of course, we'll have analysis and highlights from our team of correspondents and contributors. All right, let's dive further now into the tariffs we discussed earlier in the show as the long-anticipated measure by the U.S. against Canada, Mexico, and China. And now, in effect, you're looking at a live look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average this morning. But what does this really mean for you, for me, for our wallets? CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger joins me now from Studio 57. She also has a wallet, but she knows more than the rest of us. So, Jill, for folks who are uninitiated, just break down for us how this tariff top line makes its way to our wallets when we pay for goods eventually.
You know, when you have a U.S. company that imports a good, say, from Canada or Mexico, that company is now going to have to pay this fee, this tariff. And what normally will happen, this is what happened when we had the last round of tariffs, is that the company will pass along either all of that fee to the consumers or part of it. And what usually will happen is that the categories of goods that come from places like China and Canada or Mexico will trickle down to us and we'll pay more for those things. So what are we talking about? We're talking about something like a house. We know from the National Association of Home Builders that we get about 25% of housing from Canada or Mexico. So maybe it's lumber from Canada, gypsum from Mexico. That could add to pressure in the housing market. We know that autos, that, we assemble them in the United States, but to get to a finished product, we may go back and forth between Canada, Mexico, up to 8 times. So that means a fee will get paid 8 different times. It could raise the price of a car by about $3,000 per vehicle. And of course, food costs. We know so much of our fruits and vegetables, they come from Mexico. I think that's where you start to see the prices jump pretty quickly with perishable items. And poor me, because, of course, there's also going to be a problem with tequila. So tequila drinkers will be looking elsewhere, I think, because it will start to cost more to drink anything imported from Mexico.
Well, you make a lighthearted joke, but it's a great point overall that this impacts every aspect of life in some way, shape, or form. We noted that, Wall Street pulled back yesterday and this morning on news of this hitting. But what is the short and long-term impact? Are we likely to see greater costs down the line rather than anything happening this week?
Well, I'm not sure we'll see anything this week except that stock market volatility, that big down day yesterday and down today. I think what we're likely to see is that prices will drift higher. We could see the inflation rate move from around 3% to, say, 3.5%, maybe even 4% if these tariffs stay in place for a really long period of time. Now, of course, nobody wants that, but we're not going back to the worst of the COVID inflation spike where we had 9% annual inflation. I also think that people have to understand that these tariffs could slow down growth. And what do we mean by that? Doesn't mean we're going to propel into a recession tomorrow. But if the economy was set to grow by, say, 2.5% this year, these tariffs will start to change the way people, individuals, and businesses spend money. That could mean that we see them pull back. Growth could start to pull back. It does not necessarily mean, again, it's going to be the worst thing ever, but I think we should be prepared that it's going to be a bumpy ride. If you're an individual and you're freaked out about these market moves, I would encourage you not so much to mess around with your retirement account, but do look at your cash position. Do you have 6 to 12 months of emergency reserves built up? Have you tried to really pay down that debt that's outstanding? I think those are critical things that you can do today to prepare for an uncertain future. Messing around with your retirement account, moving from stocks to bonds or cash, you're not going to time the market. So try to avoid making any big decisions when it comes to the investments in your life.
Yeah, so important to separate the emotion you may accurately feel from the realities and the fundamentals. Jill Schlesinger, always great to chat with you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
As we've mentioned, Canada is already responding to President Trump's tariffs on the country with retaliatory tariffs of its own. And this as business owners on both sides of the northern border are really bracing for what's next, as Jill alluded to there. Let's bring in CBS News national correspondent Lana Zak. She is in Windsor, Ontario, in Canada for us. Lana, great to have you in the focal point of one side of this trade war. What are Canadians telling you about how they see this economic battle?
They're devastated. They thought that the United States and Canada were on the same team. Look, just over my shoulder here, this is the Ambassador Bridge, Errol. 2.3 million trucks pass over this bridge between the United States here in Windsor and Detroit, just over the border there. And it has been a border that has been built on cooperation. And I spoke with the CEO of Laval Manufacturing, John Azzopardi, yesterday, and he told me more about how he's feeling. Take a listen.
What I would say is that it feels similar to what I would describe as a funeral. Most people say, well, that seems very eerie and odd considering this is a trade negotiation. But you have to understand that for many years, we've done everything we could to make the relationship between us and the United States grow. We've invested in each other's economies. Most of us have family on both sides of the border. Some of us have the most fondest memories on the other side of the border. So to hear that we're putting this impediment between our two countries, it seems like a wedge, and I can only describe it like losing a family member, or somebody with, a loved one.
And he went on to explain that it isn't just a one-time tariff of 25%, especially now that those tariffs look to become reciprocal between Canada and the United States. He described that in his manufacturing process, he imports U.S. steel. So those trucks come over the border with U.S. steel. That's looking at potentially a 25% tariff on that part, on the wholesale prices of that. They build a mold here, and then they send it back over to the United States, where it's going to get another 25% tariff. It's refined there in Detroit, comes back over to him, another 25% tariff, and back and forth 5 times before it finally makes it into those consumer goods that you and I are purchasing. And as much as possible, he says he's going to try and absorb those tariffs, but of course, that is not sustainable. His company, he says, can only survive that for about 6 to 9 months.
Stunning to hear him describe it as grief. And what is Prime Minister Trudeau saying about claims from President Trump that large amounts of fentanyl is being trafficked from the northern border? We know that the Mexican president says she's already working with the U.S. to stamp out the trade of illicit drugs and weapons. But what's happening on the Canadian side?
Well, that's where there's complete disbelief. Trudeau said there is no justification for these actions because there is very little fentanyl that actually crosses this border. In fact, the Canadian government here has invested more than $1 billion in trying to stop any fentanyl from going over the border into the United States. And let's be real, fentanyl is a problem. We should be all trying to address it, but they have been working to address it. And as a result, in the period between December and January, there was a near zero apprehension of fentanyl by U.S. Border Customs and Protection. Actually, the amount, I'll give it to you, 0.03 pounds were seized. And so they don't understand at this point what they're supposed to be doing in addition to the helicopters and the patrols and the additional staffing that they have sent to make sure that there is no fentanyl that crosses, especially given that they've had these positive results. And that's why we're seeing these reciprocal tariffs coming from Canada as well.
So interesting, Lana. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expected to make an address later this hour. We'll see how much he touches on those stats that you've referenced. A very interesting angle of all this. Lana Zak, great to see you. Thanks so much for your reporting. The Vatican revealed new health problems that the Pope is facing. We'll share what we know about the state of his condition this morning. That's next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back, everyone. As we mentioned, President Trump has paused all military aid to Ukraine. CBS News foreign correspondent MTS Taya brings us reaction from Kyiv.
Well, a Ukrainian official has told CBS News the Trump administration's suspension of military aid to Ukraine gives the country only around 6 months before it starts running short of vital ammunition, as the White House continues to pile pressure on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to pursue peace with Russian leader Vladimir Putin after that shouting match in the Oval Office last week Friday, which was really heard around the world. But we have some other reporting which has found that the decision to pause or suspend aid to Ukraine, as the Trump administration has put it, was really made all the way back in January, on the 21st of January, which was the first full day that President Trump was in office. So it really does feel as if that this plan had been placed and we're only just hearing about it now. Whatever the case, Ukrainian leaders continue to grapple with what to do next. They will no doubt increasingly turn to European partners who already provide just over 50% of the military assistance Ukraine receives as Russia's war rages on. Overnight, the Kremlin launched major drone strikes on the cities of Sumy and Odessa. Back to you.
All right, MTS Taya, thank you for that. At this moment, more than 60 million Americans across the South are under this severe storm threat. You've got a massive system sweeping all the way from Texas to the Atlantic, and it's expected to bring damaging winds and those ever dangerous tornadoes. CBS News senior weather correspondent Rob Marciano is following all the latest for us from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Rob, it doesn't look too treacherous where you are now, but how bad will things get today?
Well, we're ahead of it right now, Errol, but it's already been bad in Dallas and North Texas with hundreds of thousands of people without power. You showed that line across the border in Marshall County, Oklahoma. They got 16 homes and 2 businesses there on Main Street damaged. And Ada, Oklahoma, just southeast of Oklahoma City, reports of damage there with collapsed homes and businesses and even people potentially trapped. So this is a dynamic system that's having some great impacts for life and property already this morning, and it's all moving off towards the east, and we'll be getting it, I think, a little bit later on today. And if anything, Errol, it's going to be strengthening it as it does so.
And one of the things about this region of the country, if you've got major transit arteries, I'm thinking of the I-10, for example. So what can folks in the South expect over the next 24 to 48 hours? Because they'll be in the thick of it.
They will be. Well, this line that's gone through Oklahoma and Texas is about to cross the Sabine and get into Arkansas and Louisiana. And as it does so, it's starting. You see the winds kind of in my face here. The south winds and southwest winds are beginning to pick up off the Gulf of Mexico, and that's going to increase. That's kind of the lower level winds that kind of feed into spinning the air in the atmosphere. And because of that, we think that some of these storms are going to have some rotation, and the potential for tornado is going to increase from Shreveport to Monroe, down here to Baton Rouge, down I-10 through New Orleans and Gulfport, Biloxi, potentially all the way to Mobile as we go through the later afternoons and evening hours tonight, and then continuing overnight into Georgia and then the Carolinas tomorrow. I think there'll be a similar threat there. All the while, the backside of this thing has got blizzard warnings up, and we're looking for several inches of snow to fall in places like Omaha, Nebraska, and winds blowing 40, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour. So even if you don't get a severe storm or a tornado coming to your area, this storm is going to be so big and expansive, there's going to be some potentially wind damage for millions of Americans across especially the southeastern quadrant of the country, Errol.
Wow, a cold snap after this windy slap. Rob Marciano, you and the crew, stay safe. We appreciate your reporting. Let's cross now to CBS News. Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at your national forecast. And I see you've got it in highlight there, Grant. What should people expect? It looks to be quite dangerous.
Errol, the activity has really started to ramp up pretty much over the last couple of hours. You heard Rob talking about it. Ongoing tornado warnings heading right towards Shreveport right now. All along that line, though, you've got severe winds in excess of 58 miles. We've already seen some severe thunderstorm damage because of these severe storms moving through, and we expect more as we go throughout the day. You see that enhanced risk stretching from southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, all the way along the northern Gulf states into the panhandle of Florida. So that's today. Into the day tomorrow, though, the threat continues, but the focus is going to be on northern Louisiana into southern Mississippi and southwestern Alabama today for that threat for some strong tornadoes, EF2 or stronger. And then there's that severe threat extending through the Carolinas all the way up into the Northeast as we go into the day tomorrow. Like Rob said, this is a massive storm system with the winter side to the north. That could drop up to 15 inches of snow before the system clears off the coast as we go into the second half of the week. Back to you, Errol.
Wow. Just have your battery-powered radios ready just in case. Grant Gilmore, thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. This morning, Arab leaders are in Cairo for an emergency summit on the future of Gaza. Now, they're hoping to put forward a proposal to counter President Trump's plan for a U.S. takeover. Meanwhile, there's uncertainty around whether the Gaza ceasefire itself will even continue to hold. CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Patta brings us more from Jerusalem.
Well, there's despair in both Gaza and Israel as ceasefire talks have been derailed. Negotiations for a permanent end to the war and the release of all the remaining hostages remain at a standoff. Hostage families and their supporters were out on the streets again, their voices louder than ever, demanding a deal and accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of abandoning the captives. They are desperate that with the ceasefire hanging by a thread, so too is the safe return of their loved ones. And last night, violence erupted in Israel's parliament, the Knesset, as guards used force to physically prevent bereaved families and relatives of hostages from entering the visitors' gallery to watch a debate on probing the October 7 attack. With the deal in limbo and Israel's suspension of aid to Gaza, Palestinians living in tents and bombed-out buildings are also worried that the situation will deteriorate and return to the levels of starvation seen during the worst days of the war in Gaza. Already, the UN estimates more than 60,000 children in the territory need treatment for acute malnutrition as a result of more than 15 months of fighting. Back to you.
Deborah, thank you for that. The Vatican says Pope Francis no longer needs a mechanical ventilator to breathe after a concerning medical setback yesterday in his ongoing fight against pneumonia. The 88-year-old pontiff's condition is now considered stable, though he's not in the clear just yet. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay brings us more from Rome.
Indeed, well, another setback for Pope Francis as doctors and the Vatican reporting that he suffered an acute respiratory crisis on two separate occasions yesterday. Doctors having to intervene and aspirate a buildup of mucus in his air passageways. Doctors also saying that the pontiff nevertheless has remained vigilant and cooperative throughout this entire ordeal, much has been true throughout his entire hospitalization, which began here 2.5 weeks ago, initially for bronchitis, but for something that's devolved into double pneumonia. They're also reporting some positive news for the pontiff. He's no longer on that mechanical ventilation. He's back to using nasal tubes and high flow oxygen. Still, his prognosis remains guarded, meaning doctors still can't predict if the 88-year-old pontiff is going to get better or worse. Still, a very serious situation for Pope Francis. Back to you.
All right, Chris, we appreciate the update. Thanks. Severe weather is threatening to upend Mardi Gras celebrations in Louisiana. We're following the forecast and preps underway across the state. You're in the right place, streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. Let's get right to our top story. China has responded immediately to the new U.S. tariffs, announcing retaliatory measures against U.S. food imports. CBS News foreign correspondent Anna Corin brings us the latest from Beijing.
Well, China's government is refusing to back down, saying it will play along to the end if the US was bent on waging a trade war. Well, that statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Beijing comes as China retaliates against new US tariffs that came into effect today, announcing a 10 to 15% hike on US agricultural and food products, ranging from wheat, corn, cotton, soybeans, beef, chicken and dairy. China also placed 25 US firms under export and investment restrictions, citing national security concerns. Well, last month, President Trump announced 10% blanket tariffs on all Chinese exports. Last week, he said he would double that, claiming China was not doing enough to stem the flow of fentanyl to the United States. Well, I spoke to one Chinese commentator who said, well, China's counter tariffs will affect US farmers, which is part of Trump's base. He believes Beijing is being measured in its response and that it doesn't want to blow up or inflame the situation. But with this all playing out on the eve of the National People's Congress, where the government is expected to outline policies to strengthen the economy, there are genuine concerns here that the world's two largest economies are on the path to an all-out trade war. Back to you.
All right, Anna Corin, thank you for that. President Trump, as we've mentioned, will address a joint session of Congress in a matter of hours now. He is expected to lay out his vision on the economy, federal layoffs, support for Ukraine, and immigration. CBS News spoke to Senator Katie Britt and Senator Elizabeth Warren this morning, and as they are from different parties, they have two very different takes on what to expect tonight.
I think President Trump is bringing people to the table. I think people understand. He said all along, there may be some short-term pain in order for long-term gain. And I think Americans ultimately want to see Americans back in the driver's seat, us prioritizing our jobs and opportunity here and the safety and security of Americans.
The places to be worried are what's happening in the central part of this economy. Right now, the Trump vision is billionaires win, families lose.
CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small joins us live from Capitol Hill with more on this. And I know just a few moments ago, Torian, House Speaker Mike Johnson addressed the press. What's new there?
Yeah, and just like we heard from Senator Britt, Johnson echoed what he believes Republicans are projecting in this speech from Donald Trump. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Makes his triumphant return, of course, tonight, as was mentioned. It's 5 years after his last State of the Union address. This is a joint address to Congress, not a State of the Union, because a State of the Union is typically delivered on or around the sort of the one-year anniversary, first year in office. But this president is working so quickly, I invited him to come early in the process to give this joint address because there's so much to report to the people, and we're delighted he's going to be there. If he just stood at the Speaker's rostrum and read off all his list of accomplishments since January 20th, we'd be there all night. I don't expect it will go that long. He's going to give a truncated version of this. But there really is so much to celebrate. The president has already...
Yeah, fast-acting administration as well as fast-tracked confirmations is expected to be highlighted in the president's speech tonight. This is Democrats are pushing back quite a bit, talking about this radical reformation of the federal government that has led to several firings across departments. In fact, we're seeing Democrats invite fired federal employees as their special guests for the evening to underscore the consequences in their minds to Donald Trump's presidency so far.
And we understand, Torian, that Democrats have chosen first-term Senator Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan to give their official response to the president's address. Tell us the strategy there.
Yeah, Dem leadership like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have touted her as a rising star in the party. We know her as obviously a former congresswoman and now senator of Michigan, a battleground state in 2024 that she just narrowly won, holding down another seat for Democrats in the Senate. But she also has a background as a CIA analyst and official in the Department of Defense. That resume is what they're flouting touting here as they look forward to her being the response to President Trump. It also comes after Britt delivered the response to mixed reactions to Joe Biden's State of the Union address last year. So they're looking to draw parallel between the administration, the state of the Republican Party, and what they see as the future of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, no matter the party, it's always a tough act to follow after the president addresses a joint session of Congress, but we will be tuned in to watch it all. Torian, thanks so much. And about that, you'll want to stay with CBS News 24/7 all day for continuing coverage of the president's address to Congress. Join us at 5 p.m. Eastern for a special edition of America Decides. The speech is at 9 p.m. Eastern, followed by, of course, as we mentioned, the Democratic response. And then we'll have analysis and highlights from our team of correspondents and contributors. Now, just hours after her confirmation by the Senate, Education Secretary Linda McMahon sent a department-wide email about its final mission. Those are her words. You see the email here. It partly says, quote, "We must start thinking about our final mission at the department as an overhaul, a last chance to restore the culture and liberty and excellence that made American education great," end quote. President Trump has vowed to dismantle the Department of Education. And McMahon, the former CEO of the World Wrestling Entertainment Organization, was approved by the Senate yesterday in a vote of 51 to 45. President Trump's federal funding cuts are having major impacts on nonprofits who are now facing uncertainty as they lose funding critical resources. CBS News Minnesota reporter David Schumann brings us to one nonprofit that helps Minnesota victims of domestic violence. It is now at risk of shutting down.
We are an important part of the public safety aspect of Minnesota. If there are no services for victims and survivors, it would be devastating.
Artika Roller's done the hard math. If nothing changes and federal money remains frozen or cut, Cornerstone Advocacy Service will have to significantly downsize in 12 months.
It puts us in a dire position.
Cornerstone serves more than 5,000 domestic abuse victims, providing resources, advocacy, housing, and its shelter. 30% of Cornerstone's budget comes from the federal government.
Do you continue to provide services and you might not get reimbursed for that, or do you scale back and stop your services? We've been committed to continue to provide services.
And they're just one nonprofit. Dozens of organizations for crime victims around Minnesota are facing similar existential questions. The Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault counts on federal grants for 90% of its budget.
We're dealing with so much trauma, and this just adds on to the anxiety and worry that our team has to do this under.
Kenosha Alexander says they can make it 7 months before cutting staff and services. She'll be testifying to lawmakers this week to lobby for state funds to make up the shortfall.
I think it's important that the feds and our state say, you know, this is something that we consider a priority. It is not a waste. It is important that our citizens have a safe place to go.
David Schumann, WCCO News.
Some other big stories for you now. A House subcommittee is hearing testimony on air traffic control staffing shortages and technology issues the FAA is facing. Over the weekend, several airliners attempting to land at Washington's Reagan National Airport received what appeared to be false alarms from their onboard collision systems. At least 6 incidents occurred within 11 minutes of each other. The airport is, of course, under heightened scrutiny after last month's deadly crash between a Black Hawk helicopter and a commercial airplane. All right, the crowds are descending on New Orleans for Mardi Gras, but will severe weather dampen their celebrations? How the city is preparing for potentially dangerous storms. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Floor debates in the United States, of course, can be heated, but you rarely ever see something like this. Did you notice the smoke bomb there? This happened today in Serbia. Opposition lawmakers staging a protest with several smoke grenades. The protest injured at least 3 of the lawmakers there, one of them seriously. And these demonstrations continued outside after the chamber was cleared. Firefighters hope that a forecast of lighter winds will help them make progress today against the wildfires burning through the Carolinas. South Carolina's National Guard is assisting in the efforts to contain the flames. Both Myrtle Beach and Horry County are under air quality alerts due to all this smoke. And in North Carolina, the state's forecast service reports at least 10 active wildfires there as of this morning. And good times are officially rolling for Fat Tuesday down in New Orleans. Mardi Gras revelers packed the Big Easy for parades that featured more security than any event in the city's history. And this comes as much of the South is faced with severe weather and tornado threats that have prompted other parades to be cancelled. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at your national forecast once again. Grant, some people in New Orleans partied over the weekend. They got that out of the way. But folks still looking to do something today. How much weather danger are they in?
A significant threat for severe weather today, Errol, all across the mid-Mississippi Valley, the southern Mississippi Valley, and even into the mid-Atlantic and northeast as we go into the day tomorrow. Let me turn on the radar. This is happening right now. Just look at this massive storm system that's moving through the central and then Midwest and Northeast United States. But this area, those storms that are currently moving across the Mississippi Valley from anywhere really Missouri south are working with that threat for severe weather. Let me drop this. Head over here with me. Let me show you the ongoing threat that we have across the entire United States. We already have several reports of severe thunderstorm wind damage across the south. And then you've got a winter side to this system where we have blizzard warnings in effect, where some places are going to deal with 70-mile-per-hour gusts combined with blowing snow. That reduces the visibility. And I did mention those gusty conditions. It's not just to the north and to the south, but look at every single one of these areas that you see shaded here. Those are either wind advisories or high wind warnings. That includes over 72 million people as this storm system tracks to the east. You've got severe storms ongoing, a couple of tornado warnings just east of Shreveport. That will track to the east as we go throughout the day, with strengthening storms as we go through the afternoon. So we've got to watch this storm system all day long and into the overnight. Back to you, Errol.
Grant, thank you for that. Let's get down on the ground now with CBS News reporter Katie Weiss live in New Orleans. You are in a location where there's a high wind warning, Katie, but folks around you appear to be enjoying themselves. Give us a sense of the atmosphere and what's expected today.
Absolutely, Errol. As you can see behind me, one of the most famous parades in New Orleans is well underway. It's the Zulu crew here that's rolling down St. Charles Street in the historic Garden District of New Orleans. And you can see there are so many people out here not letting that threat of severe weather rain on their parade just yet. That said, there have been several parades for Fat Tuesday that have been canceled, parades that were supposed to take place in the afternoon, and some other parades that were supposed to go after this Zulu parade. Those are actually going to be cut short in distance to make sure that they can avoid too hard of severe thunderstorms or those high gusts of wind.
And Katie, behind you, we see what appears to be the National Guard standing by. I know that there's more of a security presence this time around. You were there also after the Super Bowl and the New Year's Day attacks. So give us a sense to how this compares and what the planning is.
Yes, Errol, you know, we can see federal agents in full tactical gear, SWAT gear, on just about every block where Mardi Gras is in full effect. You can actually see over here, this is the Bearcat for the Customs and Border Protection agents. And over here, we have Customs and Border Patrol agents who have been out on this razor throughout the day, patrolling this parade route. These are just a few of the many, many of hundreds of federal agents that have been out here patrolling both by air over on the Mississippi River and, of course, here on land.
And the CBP doing what they can to keep people safe so that folks around you can enjoy the day. Katie, thank you for that. You and the crew, stay safe and stay dry tonight. We appreciate your reporting. We have much more news straight ahead for you all. We are standing by for Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He is expected to address the U.S. tariffs any moment now when it begins. We'll bring it to you. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're tracking for you right now. In New Mexico, a fast-moving dust storm created zero visibility conditions for residents in New Mexico Monday. Several cars crashed as winds whipped the dust upwards of 65 miles per hour. State officials closed down major interstates due to those dangerous conditions. New York is now the latest state to confirm cases of the measles. New York City health officials say there are 2 cases in the city, but have yet to say the exact location or if the cases involve children. One child has already died in Texas from the growing outbreak there. Just a few days ago, 3 measles cases were reported in northern New Jersey, as well as 1 in Pennsylvania over the weekend. And firefighters in Japan are battling the largest wildfire they have seen in decades. Just look at this. The flames erupted a week ago in the northern part of the country. So far, 1 person is dead and about 4,000 have been evacuated. The country's disaster management agency says 6,400 acres have been torched so far. All right, President Trump is giving the heads of federal agencies until next Thursday, that's Thursday of next week, to submit plans for eliminating more government jobs. The thousands being cut are much more than numbers on a payroll list. We're talking about real people here with lives and families depending on that income. CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns spoke to one of the families impacted in Maryland about the emotional toll of these firings.
What do you want for lunch today, Mom?
We joined Kate Scaife Friday morning as she made her kids lunch, dropped them off at the bus stop, and headed to her office at USAID, where she was a program analyst. Scaife was one of thousands of federal employees who received an email saying they're being affected by a reduction in force, government speak for "you're fired."
It has been one of the hardest months of my life. To feel that I did something wrong when all we were trying to do was the right thing.
They are increasingly viewed as the villains.
That's top Trump official Russell Vought talking to his right-wing think tank in 2023. Vought has helped billionaire Elon Musk carry out the mass firings across the federal government. Last week, Vought sent this memo directing agencies to plan for a significant reduction in the number of full-time workers, an effort to shrink the government that could ultimately leave 700,000 federal employees across the country out of a job.
We want to put them in trauma.
That trauma was on display Friday as USAID workers left the building for the last time.
USAID saves lives.
That's how you would have described your work?
That's right. We make America safer.
For the last 2 years, Kate Scaife's job was to make thousands of humanitarian programs around the world run efficiently, a role she optimistically believed would match the priorities of the new administration.
One of our senior leaders came up to me at one point, passed me in the hall, and said, "Be prepared to be the most popular girl in the room in a couple of weeks."
Her illusions faded last month when Musk tweeted about feeding USAID into the wood chipper. The next day, Scaife couldn't log on to her work devices.
I felt disappeared, right? All of our work was made invisible too.
We rode with Scaife as she drove to the office.
I've got my kids' pictures.
You leave it there thinking you'll get it back.
It'll be there on Monday. Yeah. Right.
She was allowed 15 minutes to clean out her desk.
It just felt really demeaning to be treated like that.
Scaife had been the breadwinner in her family.
How do you talk to your kids about this?
It was so hard to tell them things like, we've made summer plans for these camps and, I can't afford that.
It feels like work was a big part of your identity.
I feel like I am my best mom when I have this other part of me that helps me to feel engaged with the world. I don't know how I'll find something new that gives me that same joy.
A feeling now looming for hundreds of thousands of federal workers. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Important reporting there. Let's cross over now to CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with our last look at your national forecast. Grant, how does it look?
Errol, ongoing severe weather across the lower Mississippi Valley today. We've got tornado warnings in effect for Louisiana, where we've got this enhanced threat for severe weather that continues as we go throughout the day into the panhandle of Florida. Look at this massive storm system. It's not just severe weather, but winter weather on the north side, where some places will deal with blizzard conditions today, pick up 9 to 15 inches of snow. That severe threat goes into the northeast as we go into the day tomorrow before clearing off the east coast as we head into the second half of the week. Errol, back to you. Everybody stay safe.
All right, Grant, thank you for that. Good advice. And that does it for me for today. I will see you on the CBS Morning News tomorrow at 7. But stay right where you are. Mugo Odigwe is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.